In this video, we want to look at how we can hook up actions using signals and slots. And we also want to look at a more sophisticated way of structuring programs. So a lot of our programs have simply put all of the code in main. And if we look at main for this particular application, which is the plus and minus application, we see the code is here as well. The difference is that rather than just building one of the standard Qt widgets, we're actually creating an instance of our own window. So what we want to do is we want to have a look at our own window and see what in the world this thing does. Now you notice the rest of the code is pretty much the same as we've seen before. It sets the window up, it resizes it to set how big we want it to be on the screen, and then it sets its window title so it'll appear up in the title bar on the screen. Finally we show it, and then we execute the app to start the event processing. So let's look at the header file for plus minus and see what's in there. So in the header file, we're actually extending QWidget. Now QWidget is the root class of all the other widgets, and we can simply extend it to create a brand new widget. And largely we're going to build these widgets from other pre-existing widgets. In order to make this work, you have to include this QObject. That builds all the stuff that's necessary for the meta compiler, which is going to make signals and slots work properly. So we get a constructor which takes a pointer to the parent, which defaults to null if we don't provide one. Now you see something you've never seen before, and it says we're going to declare slots. They have extended the C++ language to allow you to now declare slots. Usually you could just say it's private, it's public, it's protected, and declare different data types in there. Now you've got a section for slots. Now a slot is basically a function which can get connected to a signal. So when another widget sends a signal, you can connect it to one of these slots and have the slot do something. We have two slots here, one called on plus and one called on minus. And every time somebody presses the plus button, it's going to call on plus, and the minus button, it's going to call on minus. Let me run this application so you can actually see what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to click run here so you can see what it looks like. And here's our little application called plus minus, and it's got a plus and a minus, and those are buttons. And down here it's got a label, which is simply got a 0 in it. And if I click plus, it goes to 1, then 2, then 3. And if I do minus, it goes back to 2, back to 1, back to 0, to minus 1. And that's all it does. Plus will take it back to 0. It does plus and minus. So what we're going to be looking at is how we hook the click action there, which sends a signal to a slot on the label. Now, it's actually not a slot on the label. It is a slot on this entire thing. Okay? So what you see in here is actually your plus minus widget with the plus and the minus, and in there it's got the label. And we'll see how that works. So what it's going to actually do is connect that signal from the plus button to this entire widget. And then that widget's going to decide what to do with it. Okay. We declare our label, and that's the thing that had the 0 or the 1 in it. And now we have to look at the actual code for plus-minus.cpp. In plus-minus.cpp, we start out and we build the constructor. We pass the parent pointer onto the constructor for the QWidget. Then we build our two push buttons. Okay. Now, we set the parent of every one of those push buttons to be this, which is, of course, the plus minus, which means that they're going to be children of the plus minus widget and appear inside it. I set the label, which I declared the pointer for, here, and I actually create it. Now I'm going to use a grid layout, and a grid layout lays it out kind of like an XY grid. It's like a matrix. And so I create a grid layout, and that's going to automatically lay things out. And we use layouts a lot of time because we don't like people to have a thing that doesn't resize itself properly. So layouts are responsible excuse me, for automatically laying out things when they're resized. I'm going to add the widget, the plus button, to row 0, column 0. I'm going to add the minus button to row 0, column 0, or column 1. And I'm going to add the label widget to row 1, column 1. Okay, so that's how I do the layout, and it figures things out and makes them look good. I set the layout on my widget, which is the plus minus, to be the grid, and that says, oh, that's my layout manager, and I'll use it. Then what I have to do is I have to actually connect the output of the push button to the input of my plus minus widget. Let's take a look at that. That is done with the connect statement, which is part of the widget. So it's inherited from QWidget. We can call connect, and it says I want to connect the plus buttons clicked signal onto this, which of course is me, and onto on plus, which is my slot. Now down here you see on plus. Now you're thinking, well, it doesn't look like slot, it looks like an absolutely ordinary method or function, and that's what it is. But saying that it's a slot, it means we can use this connect to connect onto it. So that's really the only difference between this and any other type of function. So on plus says, okay, I'm going to get notified. And when I do, I say the value is label.text.toInt, and that will get the text from the label, convert it to an int. Because they clicked plus, I say value plus plus, and then I say label.setText, QString, and then I use the number and give it the value, and that will convert that numeric value back to a string and set it to be the value displayed by the label. So, in short, every time on plus gets clicked, the value displayed in the label is incremented by 1. The minus button is connected to on minus, and if you look at on minus, it does exactly the same thing, except rather than adding 1 to the value, it takes 1 off the value and sets it to be the label. So that's our entire program. All the logic of how to handle those clicks is determined by connecting that particular signal to this particular slot. Now, a lot of people are probably wondering, well, how do I know that that signal exists? That'll be in your documentation for your Q push button. So if you have a look at the documentation off the web for Q push button, there'll be a section where it lists all its signals and any slots it has. And any predefined signals, you're absolutely free to use. And any predefined slots, you're free to use. Here, because we wanted to change things, and our problem was we had to convert to numbers, do some arithmetic, and then convert back to strings. If we simply wanted to say, hey, set the value displayed to be this as a string, it would be fine. But because we had to do a little arithmetic, we had to put our own code in the middle to do that arithmetic, which is why we put a slot on our own widget instead of just calling set text, which is set text should be a slot directly on the label. But we need some logic in there to do the plus plus or the minus minus. Therefore, we have to intercede with our own layer of slots that are going to handle that. Okay, so let's go over this quickly again. We see that plus minus is really a new widget, which is inherited from QWidget. We can create an instance of it, and it lays out its parts. And what we're doing is we're actually extending it and creating our own widgets from the primitive widgets that are provided for us. This is a more sophisticated way of writing GUI programs, but it's going to be the standard way we start to write them carrying forward. And we are going to be using connections to connect signals and slots all over the place in our applications.